Okay, team, today I bring to you the greatest gift of all, my magnum opus, my Earthshatter Warbringer. This character is absolutely cracked, and all my theory craft was 100% spot on. Literally, watch me dick down this Zest 5 like he's a pretty girl in a frat house. This was over so fast, I was half tempted to tell him, sorry it's the 1st of December, but when the morning comes, feel free to not hang out. On a real note, I will say I did play this pretty sloppy. I was just completely terrified the entire time of getting one shot. If I had a cleaner start to that stun phase, he actually would have died faster, and I was also kind of fucking up my attack and shout. Also, he never does the fucking frost move when I'm on this character. You can just sit there and tank the shards of ice because you have so much lifesteal from whooping his ass. But of course, he never does it. He only does the one-shot lightning nova, so whatever, I guess. To start things off, I'm level 93 on this character. I have about a day and 10 hours on him, or I suppose 11 hours. To put this in perspective, on my Titan, I did not finish the campaign till hour 24. On this character, I was level 92 by the 24th hour. So definitely a huge change of pace. And obviously a lot of that was just because I just refused to fucking do the campaign bare bones again. I thought about doing it for maybe potentially a build guide, but honestly, fuck that. Fuck playing base war in the campaign. It's so bad. Currently, I'm sitting about 14 deaths. Most of these are to like campaign or simulacrum. I think I died once on Zesh and some limit testing with Breach super early on. I would say I actually have legitimately died maps probably about 4 or 5 times. And there's a bit of a caveat to that number because I literally just threw all of the gear from my Titan onto this character the moment he could equip it. So it's very strong in mapping early on. With that being said though, this character just doesn't fucking die in maps. It's very hard to die. And when I say that, I mean you can run like fairly rippy maps. Double damage mod maps are not a problem. This Breach is a double damage breach. Honestly, a lot of it depends on the map itself. So for example, a 0 damage mod T16 or monster level 82 Valve Factory, because of the nature of Doriani's elites, that map is more dangerous than a fucking triple damage Spiderwoods or what the fuck ever. Like that map on its base value is just one of the worst maps to run. And I'll get more into that when I talk about Simulacrum. But to give you like another perspective on Simulacrum, I literally did it was a wave 10. I had 2 bosses. I had both Kosis and Omniphobia with 40% damage as Chaos, 40% more monster damage, and 80% more monster life. And I did it no problem. The next wave was Elipen. Elipen is probably the single most dangerous mod you can run into. Literally, if you go from 84 all res, which is where I'm at now, to like 80, it's like you have a third of your health. It's insane how much Elipen does in terms of damage. And yeah, the wave 11, I had just had Elipen on the wave and I got 2-shot instantly. But those little fuckers who sit on the edge and play Harry Potter the whole time, I can take both of Kosis' swords straight to the fucking mouth and chew on them like they're Laffy fucking Taffy. But God forbid Hermione Alohomores me on the fucking edge with a shitty little lightning spell when she has 15 Elipen. That's all my health. And I have, by the way, 100 all res. So I'm 15 overcap for each of my resistances, so I can handle at least Curse of Elemental Weakness. But yeah, if there's any sort of Elipen on the map, it's a hard no shot. And while we're on the topic of surviving maps, you are at your most vulnerable when the monster density is really sparse and they're all spread out and really far away. This is why Valve Factory is so rough, because all the Dorian elites just sit there on the fucking edge sniping your ass with their little cannons, and they're not close enough to wipe them, so you have to like individually slam each one. And lifesteal is only effective versus either a boss or like a ton of mobs. When you are in a massive density area and you're just slamming everything, you're at like 6-7k health per second, you're never gonna die. But it's when you are just fighting singular mobs that are fucking you up, that's when you're probably the most at risk of dying. This is why Simulacrum is so rough, by the way, because all the little Hogwarts wizards are spread out just enough to where you have to individually slam them. It's exactly the same problem as Valve Factory. Moving on to the damage of the build, the damage is absolutely fucking absurd, especially the single target. You saw it with the Zesh showcase, but that was actually with the bossing setup, which I'll get into a little bit later. This is with the actual mapping setup. This is what you would run normally, and this is mainly designed for speed, so you can actually just get through the maps as quick as possible. This is against a monster level 82 boss with max Atlas passives and 81% monster life on top of having Enfeeble, so I have minus 15% damage, and it's absolutely disgusting. This is a breach on that same map, so it's monster level 82. We have the minus 15% damage from Enfeeble, and as well, all monsters have 81% more life. I wanted to do this to show kind of the clear, even in the face of all this damage reduction, extra health, the clear on this build is absolutely fantastic. It's probably the best it's gonna get, and that is largely due in part to Warbringer. I was trying to pull up the character sheet here multiple times throughout this to show the lifesteal value, but honestly, I just never really kind of caught it. The density on this breach wasn't wasn't very good in my opinion. Either way, the clear in this build is absolutely fucking amazing, especially when you compare it to the Titan. It is light years better. And again, the damage that we have, especially for clearing, is just absurd. You can literally quadruple the fucking monster life. It doesn't matter. Another thing that's really nice about this too is you will auto delete rares. I run this problem on my Witch Hunter all the time, where even though I can just delete multiple screens away from me, if I come across a big fat rare, it does get kind of annoying. You never have that problem on this build. I mentioned it in the last video and I've talked about it multiple times, but let me explain to you why Warbringer is so much better for this build. Firstly, as I mentioned previously, the clear on Warbringer is disgusting in comparison to Titan, and this comes from a few sources. Firstly is Warcrawler's Bellow. This does a ton of work while we're mapping, and it actually adds a little bit more of a combo to our rotation, because we throw down our spikes, we shout to break the spikes, and then we shout again to break the corpses. So, and you can roll the shouts together and it looks something like this. Throw it down, and then double shout. This has so much output in terms of just wiping groups. And then we combine this with the armor explosion that we get from Anvil's Weight, because now we have armor break, which we don't have on Titan. This was a huge pain in the ass. And we can actually drop that dog shit magnified effect from our Earthshatter because it doesn't really do anything. And we add in armor explosion. So now, not only is everything exploding next to each other, but we're also getting that double hit from Warcrawler's Bellow as well. On top of all that, we add in Culling Strike for Murderous Intent support on our Infernal Cry, and this has a 100% uptime while we were mapping, or just forever because we have Great Wolf's Howl, and all these things in combination give us really good screen clear and pack wiping, as best as we can ask for with Earthshatter anyway. All of this comes from the Warbringer Ascendancy, by the way, and this is one of the reasons why it's so much better than Titan. Warcrawler's Bellow is obviously from the Ascendancy. We get our source of armor break from the Ascendancy, which then allows us to slot armor explosion, and then we have permanent uptime on Murderous Intent because we have no cooldown on Great Wolf's Howl. I'm not sure if the Culling Strike from this applies to Armor Explosion. I would assume it would, because this support is attached to Earthshatter, and all skills are empowered have Culling Strike. Earthshatter is empowered, therefore all the supports are empowered, question mark. But yeah, all this clear is from Warbringer only. You don't have any of this on Titan, or you can get it, but it's fucking AIDS. I'll say that. Another thing that we get from having all of these layers of clear innately is that we don't have to have a AoE weapon swap. We can actually run Blink for a mobility skill on our weapon swap. I originally thought you wouldn't be able to do this on Titan because he just needs all of the AoE effect nodes, whereas we, by default, being Warbringer, need absolutely none, which is incredible. And I think on Titan, you'd run a single target on your weapon set and then an AoE on your second weapon set, because again, the clear is just really not that great. But because that is solved for us already, this allows us to have Blink while we're mapping. This is really nice to have just as a note for moving, because fuck this class, it's slow as balls. In addition to supporting our clearing speed, Great Wolf's Howl also solves three major problems that the Titan did not have an answer for. Firstly, it solves our single target rotation and cooldown problem, giving us a massive boost in our single target output. It solved the issue where you wouldn't have a Warcry available to pop your spikes. We always have spike pop on demand, which is incredible for mapping. And the other thing too is it solves the amount of Warcry cooldown recovery rate that we needed to invest in on the tree. The major problem with Titan single target was that the Warcry cooldowns fucked at least a half or a third of your DPS. Warcries only empower 2 attacks, but because of the cooldown, you would be able to get 3 or 4 attacks off before you got your Warcries back, meaning that either a third of your attacks or half of your attacks were unempowered. And literally all of our damage comes from Warcry empowerment. But because we don't have a cooldown, now we can always do 2 attacks and Warcry again, and therefore all of our attacks are empowered. This also applies with Seismic Cry. Once the boss is actually stunned, we don't have a Seismic Cry cooldown problem either. So when the boss is stunned, we can do both Warcries, hit, both Warcries. The amount of damage that you get from having 100% uptime on Warcry empowerment cannot be overstated. It is absolutely unimaginable. I would assume it's probably like the 300 to 500% more damage range, somewhere around that area. And on top of that, once we add in the bossing setup that you get from Warbringer, it is even more damage, and I'll cover that in just a minute. On top of solving your Warcry rotations, it also gives you 0 downtime on your ability to pop spikes. This is incredible QOL when you're mapping, especially once you add this in with Corpse Explosion to your Warcries. It is phenomenal while you're mapping, and having neither of those things while you're on Titan is fucking dreadful in comparison. And lastly, to elaborate a bit further, because we no longer have to invest in Warcry cooldown recovery rate, which for the Titan is a massive investment, this saves us a couple of passive points, or I think it's a few passive points on the tree. We actually end up netting a bit more Warcry speed between these 2 nodes and these travel nodes on our Ascendancy, and we no longer have to spend every single jewel on Warcry cooldown recovery rate, and also this makes that cooldown map map mod, the 50% less map mod, no longer bricking, which is really nice because fuck rolling maps is AIDS enough as is. Because we're no longer spending every single jewel slot on getting Warcry cooldown recovery rate, this allows us to get another defensive layer for elemental damage by slotting max res in all of our jewel slots, and then I actually bought an Against the Darkness that gives me +1 cold, +1 lightning, and then I invested with the +2 cold right here to get Prism Guard. Ultimately, this adds up to about 84 all res. That's where this defensive layer comes from. In addition to our Ascendancy allowing us to slot all of these extra max res jewels, it also provides us with two ways of dealing with Fizz mitigation. One, which is Anvil's Weight. Because we are breaking armor, this allows us to take Scavenge Plating, which is 70% more armor while you're mapping pretty much with like 100% uptime essentially. This brings me up to like 66 PDR, I want to say. And on top of that, you can run Jade Heritage if you so choose. You can drop Imploding Impacts, and this will give you 10% additional physical damage reduction while you have 10 stacks of Jade passively. The problem with Fizz damage mitigation is that it's essentially fucking worthless. The reality of it is 99% of the damage you will take in maps is elemental, and you can test this, by the way. Throw on Jade Heritage and walk around in several maps, and on average, what is your 10 stack uptime? Because it's probably going to be a fucking ass ton, because all you're taking is all of the LE damage from all the dickheads shooting you from miles away. You're not actually taking a whole lot of Fizz, with the exception of archers and the Forsaken mercenaries and that sort of thing. The main issue with Fizz damage is that it is one of two things. It is you need 9 billion armor to not get one shot by Count Lachlan or whatever the fuck, or you need 4,147 armor to just generally not take damage from Fizz while you're mapping, and there's nothing that will be in between. In addition to these Fizz damage mitigation problems, we just generally cannot get enough life for it to even be worthwhile. Realistically, you probably need about 4,500, 5k life, somewhere in that range, to actually survive big hits with a bunch of Fizz damage mitigation. Even if this was at 80%, you're still getting one tapped at 3,800 pretty much universally, and there's not really a whole lot we can do about that. Well, it's honestly lame as fuck, and my least favorite thing about bossing right now. Because we can't build enough defenses to have a fun, engaging, mechanical fight, we have to stack as much damage as possible because it is simply an exchange of who deletes who first. And to do this, we use the bossing setup that I have right here with our two Warcries, this helm, and a couple of jewel swaps and some passive swaps. Firstly, we take Soulless Ips. This gives us 2 copies of a support gem in 2 different skills. We run these in our Warcries because now we can take Enraged Warcry to get that 30% empowerment. We can run Pre-Med to get 15% empowerment. And this also gives us Infinite Rage because Raging Cry generates 20 rage in the presence of a unique enemy, and it only costs 10 to consume. So this gives us infinite rage, not that that's really a problem, but this empowers our Seismic Cry. So once we actually stun the boss, and in Seismic Cry is empowering our attacks, our damage skyrockets through the fucking roof. On top of this, we also run Concentrated Effect. We also take Heft here. I didn't mention this, but we take Heft because, as I did say in the previous video, stun buildup is absolutely fucking bonkers. We take Heft with Opportunity because this is absolutely cracked, and then over here we also grab Aftershock Effect because Aftershock Effect is very good, and then we take Skull Crusher as well. The idea here is that once the enemy is heavy stunned, we obliterate them off the face of the planet. So we start off with our Infernal Cry, we Earthshatter twice, we Infernal Cry again. We do this until we know they're about to be stunned, and once we know they're going to be stunned, on the next popping of spikes, we Infernal Cry, of course, but we also Seismic Cry. This double empowers our next 2 attacks with Infernal and Seismic, and then we do 2 more attacks, Infernal Seismic, 2 more attacks, Infernal Seismic. You'll notice I'm losing a ton of mana because this costs 272 mana. Once you are actually fighting a mob though, because we have Mana Leech on our weapon, our mana is infinite. If you're fighting a boss, you will never have mana problems. You leech ungodly amounts of mana. In addition to our helm and gem swaps, I also swap out my max res Against the Darkness with a 4% of damage as extra fire and lightning Against the Darkness. There's no reason to not do this. I had this on my Merc, so I just ripped it from him. This equates to about like 25% tooltip damage, so it's pretty solid. And on top of that, this grants us shock when we're fighting a boss, so it's like around 45% more damage, and it's probably more than that because tooltip damage is honestly fucking garbage. Also, I drop my blue jewel from my tree and I take a +3 Prism of Belief. This is incredible because this takes my Earthshatter spike explosion damage from 827% to 900, I think 957%, and this is per spike with 3 spikes per attack. On top of the jewel swaps and everything else, I drop out of Prism Guard and I put these 3 points into Burning Strikes. These are just highly efficient nodes for damage. They're probably around 5 to 6% more damage per point, and we're already incidentally scaling fire damage because we have Fire Pen on multiple of our red jewels. Ideally, we would have 10% on each jewel in combination with flammability because we have 100% uptime on 150% of damage as fire damage while we are fighting a boss through Infernal Cry. So there's no reason not to grab this. It's an ass ton of fucking damage. That's pretty much it for the bossing setup. You just drop a lot of max res because it doesn't fucking matter anyway. I never take Jade Heritage because it doesn't matter anyway. You might as well take Imploding Impacts. I'm assuming this gives us a lot more damage. Who actually knows? I have no idea how good Armor Break is from a damage perspective, but that's pretty much it for the swaps. Lastly, I wanted to go over Rage and some of the mechanics of the build. It's really important to understand how Rage works because Rage is the layer that gives you so much of your lifesteal. I have learned through my mapping process with this character that it is through Berserk and all of the additional rage that we have, because we have 44 rage, that gives us so much life per second from lifesteal. So you want to maintain 100% max rage uptime while you are mapping ideally. This is a bit easier said than done because when we have Infernal Cry, it consumes 10 rage every time we press this button if we have it, and we do not get the 20 rage that we're used to when we're fighting a boss. Usually when you're mapping, you really won't get shit from this, and if you're sitting there mashing Infernal Cry, it will usually result in a net loss of rage. So in order to fix this while we are mapping, we will use our first Earthshatter, we'll do an Infernal Seismic, and then the next Earthshatter we'll do a double Seismic, and then the third we'll do Infernal Seismic again, and you repeat this process over and over. This ensures that we stay at max rage the entire time, and this is really important because as it turns out, lifesteal values stack, meaning that if we are at max rage, we have a ton of lifesteal active, keeping us alive while we're mapping. I did the math really quick. If we're at 44 rage, 44 times 0.2 is 8.8. We multiply that by 1.58. This gives you 13.9, so it's about 14% lifesteal from Berserk with max rage, and again, that stacks with our current lifesteal, and it's absolutely bonkers with the amount of damage we deal. Another thing that I never really thought I'd say about this game is that this build is kind of mechanically intensive. You gotta be a little bit of a gamer. Between both your Warcries and Earth Shattering and swapping those out, so do like, you know, Infernal Seismic and then Warcry again, Seismic Infernal, or then a double Seismic, or knowing when to mash a Seismic to get all the mobs away from you, or you see a corpse explode and you need to just hit a couple Seismics right here, and then you add in a blink swap to go into Seismic, and then adding more of this, and then blink swapping again to do more. Like, you just add in a lot here, and then once you're doing this for an extended period of time, it's kind of just a lot of buttons. And then you add in, like, you're on a boss, you gotta do your double Warcry, boom, boom, hit him with the flammability, double Warcry, boom, boom. It's just, you know, not really an ideal dick in hand simulator if that's what you're looking for. To cover some general miscellaneous things, someone asked me in the other video if sim was possible on this build. I apologize. I didn't even think about sim when I said I could do all content. You most certainly cannot do sim on this build. I don't even know if it will ever be possible. The main reason is because not only are you getting shot the fuck out from the Quidditch team on the sidelines, also I think Delirious in sim slows your character because once you're like 100%, it is impossible to get your Warcries down. It slows you down so much, and far and away the single most deadly thing to this character, apart from Ellie Pen, is slows. You cannot function on this build if you cannot attack. You're already slow as balls, and the slowing from Delirium totally fucks you. While we're on the topic of slows, I recommend getting a Maim and Hinder immunity corruption on your jewels. They are a godsend while you are mapping. They're not an action speed slow like they are in Delirium. However, any form of slow is just bad in general. Rest assured, I have a video coming out where I go on an unhinged tirade about how all of the slows are total dog shit for the fucking warrior, the already slowest class, and how the entire game, literally from the perspective of the warrior, shafts the shit out of him, and it's total fucking horseshit. Covering jewels really quick, for your blue jewels, you only have one, and you just want max cold res and health on kill. If you can get elemental damage, that'd be nice, but it's honestly hard to find those, and we only have one, so it doesn't matter anyway, and there's just not a lot of good mods. For greens, attack speed and max lightning, and ideally movement speed if you can find it, although GL, I have not seen one. And for reds, we want max fire, rage on hit, and fire pen, and whatever else, ideally probably empowered attacks. And again, you want to have corruptions in all these. Corruptions are a big deal to cover stats and to cover your res, especially because you want at least 15 over your max res. So when you encounter Curse of Elemental Weakness, you're fine. To give you guys my final thoughts on the build, as far as a two-handed mace warrior goes, I think it is absolutely phenomenal. We're not stat stacking, we're not using a shield, we're just raw dog big dicking it with a giant ass hammer, slamming acid maps. It's a lot of fun. That being said, we're still a warrior. We are still worse than every other class in the game by miles, okay? We will never be anywhere close to the performance of a Deadeye, a Gemling, or an Invoker, but if you're okay with that and you just want to play a big boy hammer slammer, then I cannot recommend this build enough. I think it performs extremely well across the board. It is an excellent mapper. It's very safe when it maps. It is a phenomenal bosser, and its single target is incredible, and it all comes online at a very early budget point. I mean, I was deleting shit with like a 1 div hammer. Right now I'm at 50 div on this build, and I'm deleting Zesht in a single heavy stun, and that's a tier 5 Zesht. It scales very well as far as bossing goes. The only real negative of the build, outside of it being a warrior, is that it can't do sim, okay? And I do think that is actually a really big problem. I would not recommend it as a league starter because of that, on top of the fact that it's a warrior. The general problem is that warriors are just slow as fuck, okay? Warriors are slow as balls. They're unbelievably squishy because we take so much fucking damage. We have no way to mitigate elemental damage. We have literally like one node for that. We have no way to scale our health outside of being Titan, and even then that blows ass. Life is just a shit defensive layer in general, and yeah, I don't really anticipate warriors getting better anytime soon, unfortunately. If it's the GGG from, you know, age old, then fuck, man, it's gonna be 10 years before warrior becomes an actually viable class or even remotely competitive with everything else, but such is life as a PoE player. All right, team, my dear friends, so ends my journey of the penitent that is playing the warrior. Honestly, a lot of fun. Great time playing this class. Total dog shit. Horrendous class. Jesus, this shit is so fucking bad. But I will say phenomenal bosser, and I will keep him around for bossing pretty much the entire time, I'm assuming, until the wipe. That being said, I plan to move on to either like a poison or some concoction pathfinder, or maybe a blood witch. I haven't decided yet. I have a couple of videos coming out. I'll probably do one on ritual because ritual's cracked. I will also be doing one blithering in a storm of pure fucking rage about how dog shit melee is or warrior is. So rest assured, I will make sure our voices are heard. And also I gotta redo a part 2 of endgame bossing because apparently that shit lives rent free in my head. Apparently that just never goes away, even though I feel like everyone's criticism was totally valid. I do want to do a follow-up with that to show that, like, hey, look, we did it as the warrior. The last thing I wanted to mention was my announcement for streaming. The moment we have any sort of indication of when the next league start is for either PoE 1 or PoE 2, I will always prioritize PoE 2. I plan to do an announcement video, and I'll kick off the stream with a 24-hour stream on whichever league start it is, and then I'll start streaming from then on consistently. And I plan to do a 24-hour stream on literally every single league start, assuming that they're alternating. If I ever have to choose, I'll always pick PoE 2, as I said. But yeah, that's going to be the general timeline for streaming. The moment we have a wipe coming up, the moment we have PoE 1 coming up, whatever it is, that's when I'll start. And then once I start, it'll be a nice consistent thing on top of doing YouTube. But anyways, you guys, that'll be all for me. Deuces.